My name's Nico. I'm 27, and I just got back from a week-long business trip in Vienna, a trip I had been preparing for nearly 3 months. It was a huge opportunity for me, something my manager handpicked me for, and even though it was exhausting and the hotel coffee tasted like cardboard, I came back feeling proud. Proud and tired. I was looking forward to collapsing on my own bed, throwing my suitcase in the corner, and maybe spending the rest of the evening watching stupid sitcom reruns with noise-canceling headphones on. But when I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house, the same house I'd been helping pay for since I moved back to save money, something immediately felt off. First, the garage door was half open. Not in a broken way, but in a "we had to cram something under it" way. I parked and walked up, suitcase in one hand, bag of pastries in the other. My mom loved those flaky apricot ones from Vienna, and I froze when I saw it. My stuff. All of it. My clothes, my PC monitor, my guitar, even the mini fridge from my room. All stacked in a chaotic pile just inside the garage. I stood there staring, like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I set the pastries down, pushed the door up the rest of the way, and just stood in the doorway. My mom appeared in the kitchen doorway with a cup of tea like nothing was wrong. "Oh, Nico, you're back. How was the trip?" she asked, as if we were catching up over brunch. I didn't answer her. "Why is my stuff in the garage?" She didn't even blink. "We had to make some space, sweetheart. Don't make a scene. We rented your room for the weekend. A nice tourist couple from Spain. They paid in advance." My mouth opened, then shut. "You what?" "It's not permanent," she said, stepping out and brushing her hand across the top of a cardboard box. "They're just staying through Monday. Your sister needed the money for her dress fitting. You know how important her graduation is." I felt something in me snap, not violently, but in that quiet, almost hollow way where anger becomes cold. "You rented out my room. Without telling me. While I was gone. For a dress?" My mom had the audacity to wave her hand like I was being dramatic. "It's not just a dress, Nico. It's the dress. It's her final year, and she wanted to look like someone. And anyway, you're always saying you want to move out soon, right? Think of this as practice." That was when my dad came around from the side door, holding a roll of paper towels and wiping his hands like he'd just come from fixing something. He gave me a look that bordered on sheepish. "We figured you wouldn't mind, son. You're barely here anyway." I didn't respond. Not to them. I just turned, walked back to my car, opened the trunk, and took out the slim black folder I had tucked away between the pages of my itinerary and flight confirmations. I had carried it with me the entire trip. I'd thought about what to do with it a dozen times. Whether to say something, whether to wait. But now it felt like the decision had made itself. When I walked back into the garage, I handed the folder to my mom. "Then read this," I said quietly. She blinked, confused, flipping it open with the same disinterest she gave to my work updates. But when her eyes scanned the first page, her expression changed. It was like watching a balloon deflate. Her shoulders slumped just slightly, the smile faltered, and her lips parted like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. My dad took it from her and read over her shoulder. His reaction was slower. Not shock, not horror, but a kind of dawning understanding that you could almost hear clicking into place behind his eyes. Neither of them said a word. The silence that followed was thick. I let it hang, because they needed time to understand what they had just seen, what it meant, what I had already done before I even got on that plane. The folder didn't contain anything flashy, just a few documents. One was a notarized letter. One was a bank transfer confirmation. The rest were printouts of email threads. Calm, professional, final. I looked at them both, at the shock starting to curdle into panic in my mother's eyes. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the outsider in my own home. I felt in control, but I didn't say a word more. Not yet, because they hadn't read the second page, the one with the real surprise. It was my sister who turned the page first. I had barely made it halfway to the living room when I heard the back door open. Footsteps came fast behind me, not stomping, not running, just brisk enough to tell me she'd read something she wasn't supposed to. Or rather, something she wasn't expecting. "Wait," she said, her voice sharper than I'd heard it in months. "What is this?" I didn't turn around. I sat down calmly on the couch, crossed one leg over the other, and finally peeled off my jacket. I was tired, not just from the flight, but from everything. Years of being treated like the backup plan. The wallet. The disappointment. "You read it," I said. "So now you know." My sister, Clara, 24, youngest of the three of us, stood in the doorway like she was bracing for a storm. You took your name off the joint account? That was months ago, I replied flatly. You just didn't notice because the automatic payments kept going through from my private one. Until now. But you said you'd help me with the graduation, she started, but then she hesitated. You promised. No. I cut her off, finally turning to face her. I said I'd think about it. And then you turned around and used my room like it was a vending machine. Like I was a guest in my own house. That made the decision easy. But Mom said, yeah, I've noticed how much Mom says. I stood up, facing her now. And everyone just listens. But no one asks me what I want, what I need. You've been walking around like you're a princess in a house built on my back, and they keep letting you. She faltered, arms folded, eyes narrowing like she wanted to bite back, but she didn't. Because she knew. Deep down, she knew she had crossed a line. And now she didn't like how it felt when someone actually held her accountable. I needed that money, she said quietly. And I needed a home, I said just as quietly. But apparently, I was the only one who thought I deserved one. I walked past her, back toward the hallway, and the moment I stepped in, I could hear my mom's voice rising in that half-panicked tone she only used when control started slipping through her fingers. You didn't really go through with it, right? Nico, we were just trying to make ends meet. You mean you wanted a dress from a designer brand in Milan? I shot back without even turning around. Let's not pretend this was about survival. My dad, still holding the folder, now sat at the dining table flipping slowly through the pages, like each one was another nail in the coffin of whatever fantasy they'd been living in. He looked smaller somehow. Not old. Just defeated. You canceled the payments, he said finally, not looking at me. All of them. The utilities. The groceries. The property tax. I told you in March I wasn't going to keep paying indefinitely, I replied. I gave you 6 months' notice. And then, when no one took me seriously, I made arrangements. That was putting it mildly. What I'd actually done was far more thorough. I'd spoken to a lawyer, had my name removed from every financial tie I shared with them, closed the co-owned account, and rerouted the remainder of my personal savings into an entirely separate one. I'd even transferred ownership of the car I let them use to a family friend, someone who actually paid for maintenance instead of treating me like a free mechanic. I gave them everything they needed to stand on their own, and they chose not to. I don't understand, my mom whispered. You're just going to abandon us? That word, abandon, nearly made me laugh. You rented my room to a stranger while I was gone. You stacked my life in the garage like it was clutter, and you did it for a dress. That's not a home. That's not a family. That's a transaction. The silence that followed was loud in a way only families can make it. Clara stormed off first, muttering something about how she'd just take out a loan like normal people. My mom sat down in the nearest chair, stunned. And my dad just kept flipping the pages, slower now, until he got to the final document. The letter of termination for the utilities, signed and dated, effective this week. But it was the envelope tucked into the very back that made him stop. He opened it and paled. My mom noticed instantly. What is it? He didn't answer right away. I stayed quiet, letting the tension stretch. Finally, he spoke, voice low and strained. It's a rental agreement. My mom blinked. What? For a condo downtown, he clarified, still staring at the paper. It's signed in Nico's name. She looked at me. You bought a place? No, I replied. I leased one, and I made sure it's nowhere near here. But why would you? I needed space, I said. Real space. One that no one else could rent out from under me. My mom looked genuinely hurt now. You didn't trust us. I did. For too long. The doorbell rang. Right on cue. My dad stood. Who is that? I shrugged. Ask your guests. The Spanish couple. They're probably here to check in. He stared at me for a moment, horrified. I hope they like the room, I added, slipping my keys from the table. I even left a mint on the pillow. And with that, I walked out the door, their stunned silence crashing behind me like a wave. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Because they hadn't read the last document. The one I kept in my own pocket. The one that would make everything very real in the days to come. And when they finally saw it, that's when the real fallout would begin. I didn't go far that night. Just drove to the condo. My condo. Well, for the next 18 months at least. It was smaller than the house, sure. But it was mine. No tourists. No siblings stealing my charger. No weird guilt trips wrapped in dinner table conversation. Just peace. I didn't unpack much that night, only enough to breathe. My suitcase stayed zipped in the corner while I sat on the edge of my bed, phone buzzing every few minutes with missed calls. Most were from Mom, a few from Clara. I ignored all of them, not out of spite. Well, maybe a little, but mostly because I knew nothing I said now would get through. They had to sit with it first, really sit with the consequences. The next morning, the calls stopped. Then came the texts. Less angry, more panicked. Mom, please call me. We need to talk. Clara, you're being dramatic. Can you just send the money and I'll fix it with Mom? Dad, come home. That one almost made me laugh. Come home. Like it hadn't been turned into a bed-and-breakfast the moment I left town. Like I hadn't been boxed and shelved in the garage like leftover Christmas decorations. No, I was done confusing location with belonging. By Tuesday, the messages shifted tone entirely. Mom, the tourists left early. They said the room smelled like mold and didn't match the photos. We had to refund them. Clara, I missed my final fitting. Are you happy now? Dad, the Wi-Fi's down. Do you have the new password? I didn't answer any of them. Not because I didn't care. I did, painfully so, but because I finally understood that caring wasn't the same as sacrificing myself. For years, I let guilt keep me on the leash. Let their needs override mine like it was some unspoken rule. I was the responsible one, the man of the house after Grandpa passed away. But no one ever asked what I wanted. Then Wednesday came. That was the day they opened the last envelope. I knew the timing because my dad called me 5 times in a row. And then, when I didn't answer, he sent a text that simply said, "You're taking the car back?" That was the opening. The letter in that envelope had laid it out clearly. The car, the one I'd let them use for over 2 years, was no longer theirs. I had officially transferred ownership to my friend James, who'd already agreed to loan it back to me as needed. It wasn't petty. It was strategic. Because guess who'd been skipping the insurance payments and letting unpaid parking tickets pile up? Clara. And guess whose name was still on all the paperwork? Mine. I called the DMV weeks ago. Had them clean everything up. James was more than happy to take on the vehicle. He needed one anyway, and he actually respected what I'd done for my family. The new registration came in just before I left for Vienna. My dad's text was followed by one from Clara, more frantic this time. That car was my ride to graduation. How am I supposed to get there now? There it was. The world wasn't fair anymore. The favors had run out. The safety net she never thanked me for had suddenly disappeared. And then, finally, one last message from Mom. I don't understand why you're doing this. We're family. I stared at that message for a long time. Because I did understand. I understood exactly why I was doing this. Because family doesn't treat you like a wallet with legs. Family doesn't reduce your room to a revenue stream. Family doesn't kick you out in your absence and smile while they do it. That message was the last one I saw for a while. Until Saturday. That's when the real fallout started. It began with a phone call. From my aunt. Someone who hadn't called me in over a year. Not for birthdays, not even when I got promoted. Just silence. Until now. Nico, she said, her voice cautious. Did you really pull out of the trust fund? I froze. Excuse me. You took your name off the shared inheritance account. Your dad's been calling everyone in a panic. I rubbed my forehead, already feeling the tension throb behind my eyes. I didn't pull out. I moved it. To where? To a separate holding account. It's still in my name, just not accessible by them anymore. She sighed. You know your mom's going to flip. She already did. I heard her hesitate. Then she said something I didn't expect. I warned them, you know. Years ago, I told your mom she was pushing you too far. But she always said you'd stay because you were the good one. That word again. Good. It was always said like a compliment, but used like a leash. Tell her, I said, my voice low, that the good one finally learned to say no. I hung up, but I knew that call wasn't the end. It was just the beginning, because my mom wasn't done yet. And she was about to try one last thing to fix it all, even if it meant digging up something she swore she'd never say aloud again. I should have known the final play would come from Mom. Not Clara, not Dad, it was always her. She was the center of that household, the quiet manipulator with a sweet voice and a memory sharper than steel. When she was cornered, she didn't shout. She didn't beg. She rewrote the story, made herself the victim, turned every action into a misunderstanding, and somehow always found a way to twist the narrative in her favor. So I wasn't surprised when, the following Tuesday, I opened the door of my condo to find her standing outside in a beige coat and low heels, holding a Tupperware container like this with some casual drop-in. No warning. No call. Just a mother showing up like nothing had happened. "Nico," she said gently. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside, unsure what part of me let her in, guilt, curiosity, or maybe just a desire to finally hear what she thought she could say to make this all go away. She walked in slowly, scanning the living room like she was inspecting damage. I had kept the place clean, sparse, nothing extravagant, but it was mine. That, I think, unsettled her more than anything. "I brought pasta," she said. "Your favorite, spinach and ricotta." I didn't take it. She placed it on the counter anyway. She turned to me and clasped her hands. "Your father's been stressed. I haven't seen him this wound up in years. Claire is devastated. She cried when she couldn't find a dress in time. She could have had a dress if she didn't rent out my room behind my back," I said coolly. Mom nodded, lips pressed. "I know. I'm not saying we handled it well. I think everything got out of hand. It was never supposed to go this far." I stared at her. "Mom, you made a choice. You chose your daughter's dress over my dignity. You chose tourists over your own son." She sighed, then stepped forward. "You always made more than we expected, and you never said no. I think I forgot that you're not a safety net." That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from her. But then she pulled the final lever, the one I should have seen coming. "I also found something while cleaning your closet," she said softly, pulling a folded paper from her coat. "Your letter. The one from university." My stomach turned cold. It was a letter I'd written in my second year of college. One I never meant to send. A therapy assignment, really, venting everything I'd ever wanted to say to her. All the ways I'd felt overlooked. How I'd sacrificed my 20s to hold the family together. How I wanted to leave, but felt trapped. How sometimes I wondered what life would look like if I just disappeared and no one noticed. She unfolded the page gently. "You wrote that you were tired of being invisible, that you felt used, that no one really saw you." I didn't say anything. I hadn't seen that letter in years. I'd assumed I threw it out. "I read it," she continued. "And for the first time, I understood something I think I never wanted to admit, that I failed you, Nico. I raised you to be strong, dependable, but I didn't raise you to say no. I raised you to serve, and I convinced myself that it made you noble, but it just made you tired." My throat tightened. I hadn't cried in front of my mother in over a decade, but that moment came close. Then she stepped even closer, placed the letter on the table, and looked me square in the eyes. "So I came here to tell you that you were right. You don't owe us anything. Not money, not forgiveness. You're allowed to leave. You're allowed to start over." It was everything I had wanted to hear, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like grief, because something in her voice was final, something I couldn't quite place. I walked her to the door. She didn't try to hug me. She just nodded and said, "Be well." 3 weeks passed after that. I didn't call her. She didn't call me. Until one Sunday morning, I got a voicemail from Clara. "Nico," she said, her voice trembling. "It's Mom. She's in the hospital. It's not serious, but she fainted. They think it's stress-related. She keeps asking if you're coming." I stood in my kitchen for a long time with that message playing over and over. Eventually, I went. The hospital was quiet, sterile. I found her in a pale blue gown, thin blanket pulled up to her chin. She looked smaller, her face softer, more human. She opened her eyes slowly when I stepped in. "Nico," she whispered. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," I admitted. She nodded, looking at the foredrip. "I deserve that." I sat by the bed and didn't speak for a while. Just listened to the beep of the monitors, the hum of air conditioning. Then she said, "Your father's been trying. He canceled Clara's credit card. Said it was time she learned what real life costs. I told him that was your idea." I smiled faintly. "It wasn't. But it's about time." She closed her eyes. "We lost you, didn't we?" "No," I said. "You didn't lose me. I just stopped being yours to use." A tear slid down her cheek. "That's fair." We talked for maybe an hour. About nothing important. The weather. My job. How she missed the apricot pastries from Vienna. When I left the hospital, I didn't promise to come back. But I left a small bouquet by the window. Just lilies. Simple. The weeks turned into months. I kept my distance, but I didn't disappear. They called less, and when they did, it wasn't to ask for anything. Just to ask how I was. For the first time in my adult life, that question wasn't followed by a request. Clara took on 2 part-time jobs, moved in with a friend, paid her own rent. Dad sold the second car. And the house. They listed it. Said it was too big now. Too expensive. Maybe it always was. I never moved back. But one afternoon, 6 months later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. Just my name. It was from Mom. Inside was a single page. You were never invisible. I just wasn't looking hard enough. Underneath, it was taped something small. A photo. Me, age 7, holding a toy guitar on Christmas morning. She'd written on the back, "This was the day you stopped asking for help and started giving it." I should have said thank you then. I kept that photo on my desk. Not because I forgave everything, but because healing doesn't come all at once. Sometimes it arrives in pieces. In silence. In finally being seen.